Hi, and welcome to this episode of the DC Life podcast. Today, we're going to chat with someone about something in the life of our church.
Well, g'day everybody. Greg Gardner here, lead pastor of Disciples Church, and welcome to this DC Life podcast, which is a pretty special one because I've got some guests in the studio. I've got Fiona with me. Hi, honey. And with us is David and Wilma Fandey. David, the lead pastor of the Fields Church in Carlsbad in the wonderful state of California, USA, and his wife Wilma. Guys, g'day and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure.
Well, this month we are celebrating our 10th anniversary of public services at Disciples Church, and we just thought it would be great to have a conversation with you about, I suppose, our decade of
Your
doing
humble
this.
beginnings.
Our humble
Journey.
beginnings, because you guys have really, even though you live in America and you visit us often, but you've been part of our story from very much the beginning. In fact, you guys did our assessment.
We did.
In Sydney.
Yes.
The first time I think we met you was across a table and you were examining us as to whether we could go and plant a church. What were your first thoughts?
Well, you know, it's funny. I vividly
have a
remember
first
that.
thought.
Go ahead, Wilma.
My first thought was, this woman, instead of
Is beautiful?
instead of sitting and waiting to be interviewed, she got up, walked over, and picked up my 3-month-old I brought, and very sensitively said, "I'll hold him." And spent the rest of the interview kind of swaying back and forth. And I was so foggy-brained at the time after traveling with an infant, with a new baby.
And I vividly remember that too, because that was our 6th. You guys were ahead of us. You had already had 6. And so here my wife is nursing a 3-month-old, our 6th kid. And so that's the first impression. It's like, here's a couple that have lived this thing. Even though we're maybe a year or two older than you, you were ahead of us in the kid factor. And Fiona jumped right in there, held the baby. So that was the first thing I remember. The other thing, because I remember it vividly, although my wife was foggy, postpartum, the whole thing.
Foggy.
Jet lagged
with a 3-month-old. But the other thing I remember is, well, there's several things, but one of them is that, Greg, with your background, having done what you've done, very successful with Christian TV in Australia, that you were accomplished. You had vision. You had big ideas. And as we got to know you more and more, I'm like, whoa, those are really big ideas, and in an appropriate way, but vision with aggressive, like, hey, this is what we could do. And you had a track record of having done that. And so that was impressive. And I do remember in that assessment, one of the concerns was, will you overwork? You know, will you know when to turn off and rest? So those are a couple of memories we have.
The bit that I remember, you asked Fiona a question. What if there's one word that people use to describe Greg, what is it? And she said, arrogant. And it was like, under the bus, thanks very much. But
she knows you and loves you still.
That's right. Even though I'm arrogant.
But you know what? Actually, I guess I could have seen that a little, but as we got to, your wife might use that word, but I would not use that word today at all.
The question was, sort of what would other people say to describe him, and just in the different roles that he'd had, sort of that, and just through the season leading up to that. Yeah.
It's true though. I had some issues and they needed to be addressed. No, it's true. Wilma's laughing.
And he's different. That's why you'd say you don't think of him like that.
Not at all. But
that assessment process was the beginning of
really cool.
Me dealing with a bunch of my issues, which helped us in our marriage to deal with a bunch of issues. And you guys have been on that journey with us. We often talk about, when we're doing our marriage conferences here at DC, and we talk about our marriage and the history of it, that you guys were such an essential part of us dealing with and
some of our issues.
I never thought being involved in Acts 29 was going to be about us. I thought it would be about our church.
And look at what we're going to do. And yet God uses that as a part of the sanctifying process, which we have no clue going into. That actually is going to be such a big part of the testimony of the gospel.
So, which at one point led you to say to me, if you don't take your wife on a date once a week to talk about your issues, I'm going to kick you out of the network.
Was that bold? Yeah,
It was. Well, I took it that way, and
it worked.
But
It worked, yeah. We're still going on date lunch, yeah.
we do every Thursday lunchtime. You'll find us down at Rebelle Domain, sitting there with some sushi and talking about our issues. I hated it.
More
in the
often
beginning.
happily now than
Wait, you hated the
beginning.
date, or you hated talking about your issues?
Both.
Oh, wow.
We would get
confessions.
there, and it would be just full on hostile, and we were driving home angry in the car, going, "What are we doing this for?" Because
But so
Fandy's
we-
going to kick me out of the network if I don't, you know.
But we've
And-
been reading
and-
through books, and so that was kind of the catalyst for some of those. Like we'd take it and we were reading Paul Tripp's, What Did You Expect, and that kind of thing. And so that was kind of raising issues that we would then talk about, and not always happily.
It was such a blessing to us, and we knew, and one of the things that we say to young church planters now: if your marriage is not in a good place, it's not going to survive planting a church. And so, for you guys to kind of drill us a bit on that was, I realise it was out of love. I don't say any of these things to rag on you or
Very grateful.
Yeah.
or to push back at all. It was a super blessing. But look, the investment hasn't just been in us as a couple. It's also been in Disciples Church, and you guys. Well, I don't think Acts 29 would have got developed in Australia if it wasn't for the commitment that you guys made very early on to say we're going to come out, 3-4 times a year and just love on the church planters in Australia.
Made a huge difference.
It was such a
I
blessing to
think
us.
it did.
We look back and we're just like, that God would allow us to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just what an incredible blessing. Just as much as we rejoice over Disciples Church or the Fields, just to be able to be a part of that, and you guys received us and allowed us to walk with you and speak into. In fact, just on that marriage issue, backing up a second, that wasn't in year 1 or 2. It came later in the process.
Yeah, a couple of years
but
down the track.
to your benefit, and this is what I would encourage other people.
Yeah.
You raised the hand and said, actually, we need some help. And you allowed us in. You allowed us to love on you. We had conversation, and it's never a one-way street. You guys have spoken into our lives numerous times, but just, again, to the credit, as difficult as it was, you received it several years into the process of planting, and God had done some neat things. So anyways,
did.
Well, and
blessing.
that bleeds over to your church. All the young people
does.
that
Yes.
you're mentoring, and Fiona, you spoke about the different books that you're reading,
Yeah.
and I know
That's
that
right.
you're reading those books, looking at what can we
Pass on.
pass on. We are the older believers. What are we going to pass on to the people younger than us?
Absolutely.
So as the Lord, the Holy Spirit was revealing things in your life, that was part of the motivation was, oh, hang on, I got to pass this part on too, not just read page 50 through 55 and answer the questions, but let me help you see how that works out.
That's right. It's given us that experience, and we do. that is, as Greg said, we just had another marriage conference here, and only a few weeks ago, and all the same thing. We just,
Which you wouldn't have had that unless you had walked through that yourselves. And we wouldn't have seen the joy of that unless God opened that door for us to be a part of your lives, part of the work here in Australia, New Zealand, and now Japan. What a blessing to see that. And as you said, if your marriage is crook, then it's going to skew everything. And so God did that work in your lives.
Yeah.
He was using you before that. He used you through that difficult time, those dates you didn't enjoy because it was that friction, that hard thing.
Very
And yet,
uncomfortable.
look at where you are now. And none of us have arrived. It's just a reminder of the messiness of our lives and the beauty of the gospel. And then going back to what you said, how we got to be a part of each other's lives. What a blessing. It's great. God is so good.
cool.
So one more blessing is our church in California.
Yeah.
Extremely blessed by watching the network in Australia grow.
Yeah.
And having you guys come over and, preaching or just being there and getting to know the people. And, they love you guys.
Which, by the way, I got to say, the invitation, you need to come and preach at the Fields. Okay, so whoever from DC or other people that are listening,
Borders
let's get Greg
open.
and Fiona over.
Borders are
Now we can
open.
travel.
We're ready. We're ready.
Great.
Yeah, when we can.
Sorry, you were going to say something.
I was going to say, we in the early days, we were in a whole different bunch of venues. We started at the university, and we had multiple rooms at the World Knowledge Centre. And I think you probably
You came to
visited
most of them.
with
Yeah.
most of those. And then we launched in the school and the chapel there, and backwards and forwards. And then the opportunity came up to buy a building, which, when I look back on it now, it was crazy, really.
Crazy?
Yes,
Yes, it was.
But we did it.
Yeah.
and well, I say we. It really was a God story. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
It's a miracle.
so many doors that shouldn't have opened. But you guys helped us with that too. I mean, we were told a certain deposit amount by the bank, and by God's grace, we were able to raise that deposit. And then they
Kept
upped
going
it,
up, yeah.
and they said, "No, you need another 150 grand or so." And then we were traveling to the Gold Coast, and I was telling you this story.
I remember exactly what was it. I don't know if it was the M5 or M1. I just remember
The M1,
right
yeah.
where we were.
Yeah.
And you tell the rest of the story, but this is what I remember.
Right.
We had been saving. We're meeting in a school,
Yeah.
humble beginnings, financially tight, but we'd been saving. We'd gotten a nest egg, and we'd been looking for a building for years because we planted 18 and a half years ago. So we'd done the deal.
You'd been going for 8
and
years by the time.
we couldn't find anything. And so all of a sudden, this thing lands on your lap, and it's like, well, we've got a little bit of savings. We could maybe, and I think the number in my head was something like 30 grand. So that was this. That's what I remember on the motorway having the conversation.
Right.
Take it from there. That's what I remember.
Well,
And then,
the amount was actually 150, and
A bit more.
in the end,
more.
and
That's a
so-
mean exchange rate.
and it is. It worked all right on the way over. Going back was a little hard, but. How did that go with your elders then? Like,
so here's the deal. We're sitting on this nest egg looking for a place. We can't find a place. This money, we're called to steward. And then Greg and Fiona come along with this need. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, yeah, we could probably help you out 30 grand. And then we get this 150 grand. Now, that was Australian. But when we first started the network here, the exchange rate was more favorable for you guys. By that time, I don't know if it was 1-to-1, but then it got worse. But anyways, it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, how am I going to land this with our elders? And do we do this? So I brought it back, and everybody was skeptical, but we had this money. You had this incredible opportunity. We saw the facility, and this is the great gardener when we're doing the assessment, and they finally pick where they're going to plant. He was going to actually get ground and build a brand new building before he even had planted the church.
Yeah.
I'm like, you just don't do that. So here's another one of those. It's a small church. You just don't do this. We've been looking. We've been saving. But I brought it to our elders. We prayed about it, and I submit to them, but I lobbied, and they're like, "Okay, let's give it a go."
Praise God.
and now we have a building. I mean, it really was. I mean, if that didn't
That's right.
happen,
Yeah.
but that was God's
part of
way of
God's
providing at that time, and mercifully, we thought it could happen within 12 to 18 months. I think it took 2-3 years before we were able to get that money back and got a refinance deal with our bank and blah blah blah.
Perfect timing for
But
us.
you guys
Into
were
a building.
you were right.
Guess
at
what?
the
You were
have an
trying to build
opportunity
out
to
the
get
pointy
the
end of
building.
your own building project.
Yes, and we're
weren't
like,
Yeah.
we can't do that
We need this
without that
money.
money. But we gave it knowing that we may never see it again.
Yeah.
You know, that's how you deal with finances in that, I think, in a Christian way. And by God's grace, that was tight.
Yeah.
And again, I'd put my neck on the line with our elders, and they were gracious, they were understanding, but I'm like, ooh. And by God's grace, we're both in buildings. You happen to own yours. We're still leasing, but we have a nice building.
You
that we
do.
are leasing.
It's fabulous, actually. Yeah.
So we wanted to talk to you about a loan.
Can we have some of your equity?
kidding.
That's right.
You got a lot of equity now.
It's tough because it's that old what is it they say, asset rich and cash poor.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
all on
all
paper. It's
tied
not
up.
it's not real. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit frustrating. Hey, what a privilege we both have to be on the front line of what God is doing in people's lives. Like there's these international relationships that we get to form, and you know we have this fellowship, and that's great. But it's not all about that. It's about God at work in people's lives and seeing them not only come to faith in Jesus, but to be transformed by the grace of the gospel.
Yeah.
Sometimes church planting, and I'm sure you guys have had this as well. You know, you're in the middle of a hard time, and Fiona and I have had these moments, but we sort of look at each other and say, well, what else would we be doing? Like, what else would bring us the satisfaction and the you know,
where else, Lord, would I go?
Yeah, that's right. Than to be doing the Lord's work, whether it's hard or it's not hard. There's just great satisfaction in seeing God at work in people's lives.
There's just great purpose in it, and you know, helps us to live outside of ourselves anyway, which I think you know, we all struggle to be, you know, well, to not be self-focused. And I think just having the opportunity, as we all really do, to live for God's mission and His purposes and His glory, sort of. But that's right. You kind of feel like, as you know, church planting and that kind of thing. It really is your full-time job, as you're not sort of having to work another job as well.
Well, it's your life.
It's your life. Yeah.
Which goes back to what Jesus said, that the counterintuitive statement that the one that would seek to save his life will lose it, but the one who gives his life away for my sake and the gospel will find it. And just like all of Scripture, it's always true. We don't see it all the time, but that one, we, the Fandeys and Gardners and the church planting movement, we've seen that to be true. I mean, it is. We both our families have gone through some really hard, what we would say, hard yards. Yeah. And yet the truth of Jesus' statement, it reminds me of something else where Peter is representing the disciples and say, well, we've given up everything to follow you. And Jesus says, not just in this life, but in the life to come, you will have more mothers, more brothers, more sisters, more houses. And we've seen that.
I read that this morning and was thinking exactly the same.
It's beautiful.
Thing. That's right.
Yeah.
You know, we took, after the services today, we took a photo of the Gardner family and Extension and kids, the ones that were available, with Wilma and I have that on my phone. I'm going to cherish that because to see the clan, to see family that has loved on us and adopted us.
There's been a lot of growth,
beauty.
A lot of growth in the years that we've kind of known you guys.
Physical, numerical, spiritual.
And you know, lovely for us to get to know your family
and that's a part of your legacy as well, which is kind of cool.
It's God's blessings, right?
Yeah. It is. It's very, very
Here's
good.
something that's been really cool for us too, because even though we're a couple years older than you, we started the thing later than you, not church planting, but the family thing. We have come to you guys for advice. And we did that just this last year, a couple months ago. We were having a parenting issue, and we brought you into the inner circle, and we wept, and you guys wept with us, and God brought that around, and it's good. But we've seen that, and one of the huge blessings in our lives is to watch the Gardner family, which, again, no family is perfect. You can't. You will never write a book that says, look at, this is how we did it, this is the way to do it. Because God is sovereign and kids have responsible choices to make. But the fact that your kids are involved in ministry, they love your church. I remember at one time kind of warning you, Greg, nepotism, having too many of your kids involved, and yet it has worked out really good. The church is not centered just around you. There's other people serving, elders, leaders, and that's been a model for us. And I could say that by God's grace, our kids right now, from 25 down to 11, they love our church too, and they are involved in ministry in our church. You guys have led the example that way. Although nothing is perfect, but it's been a good model for us, and we're so thankful for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we were very mindful of that from the beginning, and it'd be interesting to talk to some of our kids about it. Fiona, I think, feels that I probably went to some lengths to very much not, give that impression or not to favour anyone from our family. That they then had to sort of put up with the fact that they were still doing a lot of the work, but maybe were not as recognised or factored in, and they've just been super gracious with us on that.
And that's what we've seen in your kids, in your family, which is.
We've had to say it's not because we didn't, value what you're doing or love you, but just mindful of the comments that can sometimes be made in church life that, if it's all about just one family, then who else will ever, be good enough to be part of it? So, yeah.
From us from the outside watching but involved, it has grown beyond that by far.
Oh, it has, by God's grace.
Which is good,
it's
because
fabulous,
in some families or church or company situations it doesn't. And seeing that has been an encouragement in our lives, and the fact that our kids love their church. There's no bitterness against the gospel, against Jesus. So far, watching you guys has really encouraged us.
Yeah.
It can be done.
It can be done. It's good.
By God's grace, we're very grateful. Yeah.
So these days, there's a few more churches in Acts 29 in Australia. You used to come out and you'd be able to get around people quickly.
And we'd all sit in one lounge room.
Yeah, that's right. And all sit in one lounge room. These days, it involves quite a deal more. That's encouraging.
That is.
It's very encouraging.
A lot more exhausting, probably, as you fly around the country.
Oh, I don't know. I love it. I do. I love it.
Well, we're always amazed by the fact that you sort of get off a plane and just start running.
Crazy.
If I didn't, we'd fall over. So I guess,
The way to get
Just
out of
keep
jet lag
moving.
is just power through it, right?
Yeah, no.
Well, some people
no.
I've tried that and that hasn't worked for me either. Do you guys get home and just need
Sleep
a
for a
week
week.
of recuperation?
Well, so you know what's funny? You should too, but so in the old days, the first 8 or 9 years, money was always tight.
Yeah.
We would do a conference up here in Queensland. You would bill it us. We'd stay with people. And as we matured, there got to be a little bit more money for some other things. But I remember one time you had me speaking at QTC.
Yeah.
We got off the plane.
You drove
went
us right there.
Straight to QTC, went to the lecture hall. Students were waiting. I walked up and after a 15-hour flight, walked up and did an hour and a half lecture and Q&A on church
that's
planning.
crazy.
So we used to roll like that.
Yeah.
In the last few years, we have learned to build a
little
day of
buffer.
rest before we leave to go home or something. So we've started, we're older too, but we've started buffering, and that's helped.
Because we're not going to get it when we go home.
Yeah, exactly. Because
There's no way, I'll get home and
Have a rest.
then.
there was one trip probably about 4 years ago where I got back into LAX at 6:30 in the morning. We had a driver there, a guy from our church, pick us up, and we drove straight down to our church. It's about an hour and a half from LAX, and our service was at 8:30. I got there at 8:20, stood up and preached 2 services after getting off the plane. Those were the crazy, crazy years.
Yeah.
We have learned to do a little better management and buffering.
Nice.
But
You're
but yeah.
human. That's great.
Yeah. But I think what it is, part of it is these times have energized us, just like being with you again this weekend. It's just energizing.
Yeah, it is.
Seeing what God's doing, being with family, those long-term relationships, going back to what Jesus said, it's a blessing.
Yes.
And we've experienced that.
People say to us, do you guys like doing assessments? Do you find that draining? And we go, look, we love it. We get to work together and go and listen to couples who want to give their lives to tell people the good news of Jesus. Why would you not like
How bad could it be?
that? And so that's been a blessing. And so that's the thing for us now, as you guys assessed us all of those years ago, we're now in the position where we're kind of, returning the favour, but on the next generation down, which is cool. How satisfying has that been for you guys to see the network in Australia move beyond just
You're grandparenting now.
these first churches that started to now the churches that are planting churches?
What would you say about that, Wilma?
It's extremely satisfying when you pour so much of yourself into something. I mean, it'd be heartbreaking to when you finally hand it over to just watch it fall apart, So I'm so happy it hasn't on so many levels. To watch, because we know, what does that mean? Every time a new church is planted, there's a gospel witness in an area. So there's that aspect, as well as just personally watching something that you've poured into continue to grow. There's the kingdom story as well, as like in that community there's another gospel witness, and and seeing that, and then knowing all the individual stories of the couples, the marriages, that those families, the kids of those pastors and their wives are gonna be growing, and so that's it's very satisfying.
And with that, Greg, we have walked through some messy assessments, some messy pastoral situations with others. We've had to remove people from the network. We have seen the marriages that have crashed. That is the fabric of life. That's not an Acts 29 story. That's a story of the Church of Jesus Christ. We read it about it in the New Testament. It's messy.
It's messy.
So we know it's messy. And yet, in the messiness of that, the gospel prevails overall. There are individual burnouts and wipeouts. Paul talks about those. But the joy of seeing God advance his church, and the joy of seeing what God is doing at DC, or even at our church, The Fields, just the fact that we still exist after 18 years with some of the craziness, and even the last 2 years with the COVID lockdowns and things like that. That testimony of God at work in the gospel is incredibly satisfying. And it's like, thank you, Jesus, for picking us to be on your team and to be a part of it. And again, it's like the life that I could choose, I wouldn't know how to choose, that God has chosen for me has been so rich, hard. But so rich. It's like, the Jim Elliott quote, the one,
He is no fool.
He is no fool, gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose, which is a paraphrhrase of what we were talking about earlier about what Jesus said. It's been incredible.
Well, when we're preaching, Dave, we'll often talk about the work that God does for us, and then the work he does in us, and then the work he does through us. And we've seen all of those things, and I think it's been reflected in the conversation that we've had even today of the work that he's doing, in us, through us, and for us, which is just so cool. There'll always be a place for you guys here in Springfield. There's always a bed at our place for you.
Actually, your kids have said that we could
stay
there too, and they want our kids to come.
They've got to get their own friends.
Isn't that funny? Well, we
each own American friend.
Gosh, that's when you know your family, when. It's great to hear that. And when we transitioned the leadership of this network over to Adam Ramsey, there was concern from my wife. Well, we don't want to overstay our welcome, which is a legit concern. But just the love that we have felt, we've always felt out from the Gardeners that, they'll take us. Somebody will take us, and they do. And so that is so affirming to know that. Gosh, I just think of the glory of gospel ministry. The people that are listening to this, and it doesn't matter if you are vocationally doing gospel ministry or avocationally, that you're all called to be a minister of the gospel. But it's a testimony of being willing to follow God's call in your life, whether you're an engineer or you're a gardener or you're a school teacher or a nurse. But we've gotten the joy and the agony, but the greater joy of being able to do this vocationally. And so I would encourage those friends of ours that are listening to this today that, again, gosh, following God's call in your life, there's no greater joy. There's no better place to be than in the center of God's will, even if that means in a boat on a stormy sea. If you are in his will, that is the place to be.
Amen.
I think also love your church. Wherever God's put you in your community, to really love that church. It's God's bride. Full of broken people, but
yes, and with that,
it's our provision.
Speaking to your community, I mean, again, nobody is perfect. No pastor is perfect. But DC crew, we have walked with Greg and Fiona for years. They love Jesus. We've seen the faults. They've seen the faults in our lives. But to continue to be grace givers as they lead you, to love them. They love you, and that's what pastors do. They are not bitter at the church. They love the community, and it's been hard. They've had heartache. They've had people attack. They've had people leave. That is the name of the game for pastors, and yet DC, they love you, and I believe they've served you well. And so I would request, as friends of the Gardners, continue to honor them, continue to support them, continue to pull together for the gospel at Disciples Church and see it impact not just this community, but as we are around the world.
And on that note,
Thanks.
guys,
Now that you're embarrassed, right?
So
well,
anyways.
look, we're just very grateful to the Lord to be able to celebrate 10 years of public services. It's a good milestone, and it's just so wonderful to have had you guys here at this time that we could reminisce
Celebrate
a little bit
together.
about what God's been doing. So thanks so much for sharing not just the journey, but the last half an hour of just being able to chat that through. And God's blessing on you guys, your family, and the Fields as well. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like more information about what's going on at Disciples Church, check out our website or email us at podcast@disciples.org.au if you have any questions or feedback. Thanks for listening in. We'll catch you next time.